name is Tony Kelly, and you have me for the next half an hour or so, giving you a take on a number of issues. I'm British born, but believe it or not, with the accent, doesn't sound too British. I was brought up in Jamaica. So my parents at an early age sent me to the land of their birth, Jamaica, while they remained in England. So I grew up in St. Thomas, a place called Whitehall, with my grandaunt and my granduncle, and also my grandmother. And as a child growing up, I had a very inquiring mind, very inquisitive. In Jamaica, we would say nosy or fast. Those of you with that background will know what I'm talking about. So I would see relatives of mine who had, starting at the top, strokes. Other relatives, blindness. Other relatives, heart attacks. Other relatives had to go into Kingston for kidney dialysis on the kidney machine from the country. Others had lower limb amputations, what we call feet and toes being chopped off. And then finally, some had premature or early death. Again, in Jamaica, we would say gone too soon, so dying in their 30s, 40s. So as a child growing up, I would ask, what's the matter with this one and that one and that one? And all they would tell me is that they have a touch of sugar. That's how people from the Caribbean and parts of Africa and Asia described diabetes as a touch of sugar. So they basically minimized or downplayed this condition, calling it a touch of sugar. Now, viewers, I need to explain to you, diabetes is more than a touch of sugar. It is a very, very serious medical condition, which we'll talk about in a bit more detail later on. So I'm going to dispel that myth straight away, that it's not just a touch of sugar. So fast forward, I went to Micro Teachers Training College, so I taught in the high schools in Kingston, English language and English literature. And I then decided I'm going to come back to England. So I came back to England in 1979 and was going about my merry life, changed direction and went into social work. And my wife noticed 16 years ago, December gone, as an early Christmas present, she noticed I was doing 4 things. It's called, in diabetes terms, it's called the 4 T's. I'll explain them to you. T for tired, T for toilet, T for thirsty, and T for thinner, losing weight. So those 4 classic symptoms I was displaying. And listeners and viewers, I was getting up 3-4 times during the night to go to the toilet. And my wife would say, something's wrong with you, something's wrong with you. But then this is, and not wanting to stereotype all men, but speaking in general terms, most men are not in touch with their emotions, not in touch with their feelings, and men do not do doctors, most men. I was one of those. So like the ostrich, we know the ostrich is the largest bird on the planet. At the first sign of danger, the ostrich buries its head in the sand, hoping that the problem will go away. Viewers and listeners, the problem does not go away. It gets worse. And I was in that situation where it was getting worse and worse, but I plucked up courage eventually and went to my doctor, GP surgery. My doctor said, so you are Mr. Kelly? I said, what's that supposed to mean? Well, we haven't seen you at this surgery for the best part of 8-9 years. And I held my head down and thought, oh my gosh, I'm in trouble now. But I took a sample of urine, early morning sample of urine, a vial of urine. And she took it from me and she dipped it, had a piece of thing, dipped it in, and it came out, showing in the light. And she said, Tony, Mr. Kelly, you have glucose or sugar, same thing, in your urine. And viewers, there's supposed to be no glucose or sugar in your urine. But for final analysis, she said, I'm going to send off a sample of your blood to the lab, to the clinic, and they will determine whether you have type 2 diabetes. And lo and behold, it came back as an early Christmas present. Yes, I have type 2 diabetes. But you heard me say at the very beginning of my life in Jamaica, diabetes runs in my family. It's hereditary. So it didn't surprise me at all in any way that I was going to get it. But the good thing about it is I made the conscious decision, having been told I now have the condition, to make the lifestyle changes, what we call the behavioral changes or the lifestyle changes, to keep the complications at bay. Okay? Now, I have done that for 16 years, 16 and a half years, because now it's June. December coming will be 17 years. And I can look you in the eyes and on the camera and say I have never taken any medication for my type 2 diabetes. And some people are alarmed and surprised, and it's to do with the way I live, the food I eat, the way I live, etc. But I need to explain to you, because we hear this term diabetes a lot, and there's still people out there who do not know what diabetes is. Let me explain to you in crystal clear terms. In our body, just behind our stomach area, we have a 6-inch gland called the pancreas. Every one of us has it. The pancreas makes the hormone insulin, and it's the insulin which regulates the blood and regulates the glucose or sugar that is produced from what we eat and drink. Now, in type 1 diabetes, and I'm going to name some people who have type 1 diabetes, our former Prime Minister, Theresa May, Philip Schofield, who does that early morning program on television, Halle Berry, the well-known American actress, black actress, and Stephen Redgrave, the rower, the gold medalist rower, 5 times on the trot at Olympics. They all have type 1. And what type 1 diabetes is, it's the pancreas stops working completely. To this day, scientists, healthcare professionals, doctors, nobody knows what causes the pancreas to give in, to pack in altogether. So it doesn't work. So you're getting no insulin produced. In that case, you then, and that happens very quickly, the tired, the toilet, the thirsty, the thinner. So you have to inject insulin. And we give God thanks and praise to a man in 1921, if you're going to go on Mastermind or any of these quiz shows, a man in 1921 named Sir Frederick Banting. He was a Canadian scientist. He noticed a very meager dog outside, or in Jamaica we would have said maga dog. You know what I'm talking about. And he and his student, Charles Best, the student was French, with a name like Charles Best, believe it or not, they injected this substance that they made in the lab, they injected it into the dog. And they noticed in 1921 the dog was making a remarkable recovery. That was how insulin was first developed, 1921. Of course, it's improved since then and it's much better, but it's a synthetic or artificial substance which everybody with type 1 has to inject, either 3 times per day with an injection pen in their stomach region, or some people prefer an insulin pump strapped to their body, and it drips the insulin 24/7 to keep them alive. Now, viewers, you can live without an arm, you can live without an eye, you can live without a leg, you can live without your teeth. You cannot survive without insulin. So that's type 1. And those who have type 1 diabetes, which is the pancreas that's packed in altogether, it has nothing to do with how big you are, how fat you are, how thin you are, what ethnicity you're from, nothing at all, or lifestyle. That is type 1. But only 10% of people worldwide have type 1. 90% of people have type 2 diabetes, which can be prevented. In my case, it runs in my family, so it's in the DNA, it's in the genetics, it's in the metabolism, so it was going to pass through to me. But you have a choice if you have type 2. Type 2, you're either not making enough insulin, the pancreas, which makes this hormone insulin, either is not making enough, or what it is making, it's not doing its job properly. And remember I said, viewers, the pancreas is situated just behind the mid region, just behind your stomach. So especially for people who have excess weight around their tummy area, the midriff, the idea is you have got to lose that weight, that fat, because it's a burning up of the fat which is needs to be done so that the insulin can be circulated properly. Also, don't just think that it's people who are fat, overweight, or obese who can develop type 2. Put simple, people who are meager, or in Jamaica I'd say again mager, can also, or an average weight, can also develop type 2 diabetes. So it's not working properly within my system, and I have to therefore be careful I don't get any of the things I mentioned earlier. And two other things I need to add to that is slow healing of cuts and wounds is another issue for type 2 diabetes, and also blurred vision. So there's 6 things in total. But you also need to understand there are some people who can be around having type 2 diabetes in their system for up to 10 years and showing no signs, no symptoms at all. So I'm going to ask you viewers to make sure you go and get your regular checkups. Because in the same way you take your vehicle, car, truck, bus, bicycle, to get it MOT tested once a year, you get it MOT tested, we are supposed to take our bodies, which are more important. Our body is given to us by Jah, Jehovah, Yahweh, whoever you worship. It's far more important than a piece of junk or a piece of metal. And I'm encouraging people, men in particular, don't do doctors. I put my hand up, I was one of those men. You must go, the NHS is here, the National Health Service, it's free. And you must go and get your checkups done yearly to see whether you're borderline, what we call pre-diabetes, you haven't got it yet, or whether you have the condition, and whether it's mild, or whether it's severe, or whether it's not moderate. But whatever happens, you need to make sure you have your checkups. And especially within the black community, we are 2 to 4 times more likely to develop diabetes than white people. And viewers, earlier, we start developing diabetes from age 25. White people start developing it at age 40. And when I do my events, people say, Tony, why is that? It is to do with our DNA or our genetics or metabolism, and also to do with the food we eat and the sedentary couch potato, sit on our posterior lifestyle that we like to lead. We need to get up and do movement. And I'm talking about movement, whether it be gardening, whether it be fast-paced walking, whether coming off the bus stop a stop earlier and then walking, whether I'm climbing the stairs and the steps instead of using the lift and the escalator and the travelator, line dancing, cleaning the windows, swimming, aquarobics, badminton. You take what is your fancy and get the body moving. It's about movement. I see people going off to the States and America and to Jamaica and sitting in a car or sitting in the plane for 6, 7, 8 hours. No, people, you've got to get up and move. It's movement we're talking about. It's just like if you park your car for 6 or 7 weeks and leave it there. You go and try and start the battery, the engine. It's not going to. It's frozen up. Your body is the same principle. It will freeze up. So we need to. Another thing I'd ask you to do is, you see that remote control which we've all gotten used to over the years? Hide it. Either take out the batteries, put dead batteries in it, or hide the remote control. And each time you need to change the channel on the television, or put up the volume or what have you, start disciplining yourself to go up from your seat and do it. You're doing physical activity that way. It is so important. Your body needs to be, that's what the heart's here for, to circulate the blood around the body. Sitting down for 7, 8, 9 hours is doing your body no good at all. So I'm into physical health in a big way, physical activity. I don't like to use the word exercise when I do these events. I've been doing them now for June this month, 8 years at Gurdwaras, mosques, churches, community centers, all free, residential homes, colleges, you name it. But the point I need to emphasize is I don't use the word exercise, because when I use the word exercise, used to in the earlier days, elderly people would say to me, but Tony or Mr. Kelly, you're actually telling me that I, in my age, sitting in this wheelchair, must go to the gym, or I have mobility problems, I can't move about. So I don't say exercise anymore. physical activity, walking, gardening, climbing the stairs, line dancing, touching your toes, getting up and down. All these are physical activities, some of which you can do in the comfort of your home. We're in lockdown at the moment in Britain because of COVID-19. And I ring a lot of elderly people and they say, oh, they're getting depressed and down. And I tell them, you need to do physical activity. It's so important. I rang my cousin in London the other day. She told me she hasn't been out of the house at all and her feet are beginning to swell. I said, come on, get real here. Have you done any physical activity at all since you've been in lockdown? No, I've just get up each morning, sit in her sofa, and then that's it for the day. She does cook her meal and then she goes back up to bed. I said, no. The movement and the body, the blood circulating has to happen to keep mind, body, and soul active. Because mentally it will help you as well. So that's very important. So the mental health and the physical health go hand in hand. If you're looking after yourself physically, then the mental health will also follow in terms of you feeling well, psychologically you're all there, and so on. I'm going to move on to diet and talk about food. You know, we people from the Caribbean will love with food. And yes, my father, I'll give you a joke. My father used to say to me, food is the staff of life, but rum is life itself. But on a serious note, we love our food. But I'm going to suggest that we need to eat food in smaller portion sizes. I'm not saying you must cut down on your carbohydrates, but remember, some people say to me, oh Tony, I have diabetes, or I'm pre-diabetes, I'm on the border, and I'm going to cut out all sugars and the bun and the ice cream. What I want you to understand is, every single carbohydrate you eat, whether it be hardo bread, yam, dasheen, cassava, cocoa bread, patty, all carbohydrates or starchy food, rice, break down into your body into sugar. You must remember that. So when you're there giving up all these sweet sugary things, that is fine to a point. But the starchy food or carbohydrates also break down into your system into sugar. So you need to be mindful of that. So we're talking about portion sizes, smaller portion sizes, less is more, and go instead for fruits and vegetables. And within our house, in our household, we don't do fry-ups. I know some of us love our fry-ups. We boil, we steam, we bake, we grill, and we roast. Boil, steam, bake, grill, and roast. Avoid the fry-ups as much as possible. And as I said, go for much more. On your dinner plate, you will have your portion of fresh fruits or vegetables on it, your salads, your proteins. If you're a meat eater, you'll have that. But do cut down on the high consumption of carbohydrates, because you won't help. Whether you're pre-diabetes or borderline, or whether you have the condition or not. And those of you who like to keep going to the doctors for medication, drugs is not the be-all and end-all. Something called social prescribing. Ask your doctor to enable and empower you to make the lifestyle changes by doing more physical activity, by eating better, then going back in 3 months' time to see what progress you've made. Have you lost weight around the midriff section, which I spoke about earlier? Are you slimming up and toning up and feeling better within yourself? It's about you taking control of yourself. Form a walking club with 3-4 of you and knock on each other's doors to motivate and encourage each other to go out and do walking. And don't walk on flat surfaces like this table. Find gradients and steep hills. And when you walk up those steep hills and gradients and talking to your friends about Brexit and COVID-19 and the weather and everything else, you don't realize you've walked 3 miles up a hill. Something which under normal circumstances you won't do. When you go into the supermarket, don't use a travelator. Right next to the travelator, if I had my way, I would ban travelators in the supermarkets in this country. Right next to them is the stairs or steps. Get some physical activity by using the stairs or steps. Because ask yourself the question, how many of you have a travelator at your home? The next thing to ask you is, how many of you were actually born in a motor car? And I know 99% of you will say no. So why do we have to take the car going everywhere? When I was growing up in Jamaica and we're running down hill and gully and climbing mango tree, and then we get the coconut bunker and we slide down and have fun and so on. And everybody now is on the Games Boy or the PlayStation or the mobile and so on. So the only physical activity is these fingers and thumbs. Come on, put those things down and go out there. Enjoy the fresh air. That's what I'm about. And I give you that message loud and clear. You get a good night's sleep after that. You will sleep sound. You'll sleep well. Now, I'm going to move on to COVID-19, which this pandemic, which we know, and the coronavirus. I always get a tongue-tied with that word. But I'm going to give you my take on it and how it's affected the black community. I'll start by saying the coronavirus is in a lot of Caribbean countries. And yet still, I'll give you a clear example. Jamaica still has only had 9 deaths. I'll repeat, 9 deaths from this virus. Okay? Why is it that Britain, a third of the deaths here are from the African, Caribbean, and Asian community, and the same applies to the United States? They're saying it's things like because we have underlying conditions like diabetes, heart disease, chronic kidney disease, hypertension, and dementia. I can't dispute that because I'm not a health professional, so my health disclaimer is. However, if that is the case, that's the same thing in Jamaica. They have an abundance of heart disease out there and an abundance of diabetes and all the other conditions I mentioned. But the death rate is low. The issue for me is there has got to be something about health inequalities that's impacting African, Caribbean, and Asian people who actually live in Britain. Health inequalities and racism. Never forget that word, racism. We are not giving the people in Britain a fair chance. I am doing my work as a diabetes ambassador, doing 140 plus community events per year, going into communities and engaging with people and saying, it's better if you did this, you do this, you did this. You can carry a horse to the water, but remember, you can't make it drink. So I go out there and I give all this advice. And I'm saying to the healthcare professionals, my plea to them is, a lot of them have to come from behind their laptop computer, from out of their ivory towers, from out of their offices, and go and engage with communities. It's called community engagement, community cohesion. You need to go and engage with communities. Because I go to a lot of conferences, and this is what they say to me. And viewers, I'm going to ask you to carry this forward with you. They like to talk about hard to reach communities. If you don't believe me, look it up on the internet. Just put in hard to reach communities. It is there in abundance. And you know who they're talking about? The African, the Caribbean, and the Asian communities. And I go to a lot of events with all these lots of white people, healthcare professionals, and these top ones on the platform. And I'm afraid I have a big mouth. And when they start talking about hard to reach communities, I challenge them. And I beg you challenge them. When I ask, who are these hard to reach communities? They say, oh, the Africans, the Caribbeans, and the Asians. Here's my answer, and I want you to hear it well. Are these people, are we here? Are we on Mars? Are we on Jupiter? Are we in the rainforest? Are we on Mount Everest? Are we in the jungle or in the deep blue sea? Please do not patronize and be condescending by calling our communities hard to reach. We make up the community, and it's up to them. We have a well-known saying, if Muhammad can't go to the mountain, then the mountain must go to Muhammad. And that's where I see the issue with COVID-19, where, I'm not wanting to say this in a bad way, but it probably is a blessing in disguise that it has happened. Because we've been talking about racism for many, many years. My background is equity, equality, and diversity. I've done racism training, all of that thing over the years. And people have not listened. or they've listened but they've not bothered to take it on board. They're just a lip service, and they let one or through and say, oh yeah, there's a glass ceiling. That's it. That's your lot. Now this COVID-19 has been a wake-up call for the authorities, the local authorities, the government, all the people in these powerful positions to say, black people, our lives matter. Even from the COVID-19 bit. We'll go on to George Floyd in a bit, but our lives matter. And if the National Health Service is spending £10 billion alone on diabetes, that's a fact. You can go and look it up. We are supposed to be making sure communities are made aware, they're given the information, they're given the education, they're called in to wherever. They do have now a national diabetes prevention program run out across the entire country. And if you get a letter or invited to your surgery, GP surgery, to come and do the test, if you're in a certain age group, which is anybody over the age of 25 within the black community, or if you have any of the symptoms I said earlier, or even if you don't have the symptoms, you need to go and get your check, because sometimes it might be a case where you are not yet diabetes, and say thank God for Jesus if that be the case, and make the lifestyle changes. Because once you get the medical condition, and it's a medical condition, some people like to refer to it as a chronic disease or a non-communicable disease. I was told in my training to refer to it as a medical condition. Once you get it, you try and get rid of it. There's no known cure for diabetes. You need to hear that loud and clear. I'll repeat, there is no known cure for this medical condition. Some people, not many, have been able to reverse it by leading a very, very disciplined lifestyle. I haven't been able to reverse mine because it's in the genes, it's in the DNA. But a few people have. But the bulk of people who have it, once you have it, you have to live with it. So those who are pre-diabetes, and those who are on the borderline, same thing. And those who are carrying too much weight around their midriff, and those who are not eating healthily, eating all this junk food or fast food, and not doing any physical activity, I'm urging you to get off the proverbial, you know what I'm talking about, your backside, and go and do some stuff to get you more active and make mind, body, and soul tick over. So the COVID-19, I'm not saying that these things aren't underlying issues, but there's health inequalities, socio-economic factors, and racism which have played their part in the number of deaths that have happened here in Britain and the same in the United States. Because Africa, as I said earlier, the Caribbean, have had nowhere near, even although they've had the people been infected with the virus, have not nowhere near the amount of deaths that we have had to put up with in this country. I wear many hats, and I am the secretary of the Jamaica Diaspora UK. And the amount of emails and correspondence that has come in to me from February through to now of people who have died from COVID-19, it's alarming. And also the same applies to the amount of people who are in hospital in what we call the intensive care unit, struggling to survive because of this. And I'll bring another dimension into it to show you how the racism plays its part. At the beginning of the crisis, they were bigging up the NHS, and all the media, the mainstream media, were showing pictures on their front page, all the mainstream media, most of them, of the NHS workers. Every single person that they put on the front page of most of the newspapers back then, this is going back in February, March, were white people. Viewers, 44% of the National Health Service is African, Caribbean, and Asian people. And I tell you something for nothing. In 1952, my aunt left from Bath, St. Thomas, Jamaica, to come and train here as a nurse. The following year, 1953, my mother left Bath, St. Thomas, to come to train as a nurse in the National Health Service. And in 1956, my other aunt came here to train as a nurse. So 3 sisters from one family in 52, 53, and 56. Remember, the National Health Service was formed in 1948. So not long after it was formed, here they were. And I wrote a piece in The Voice, which you can go and look, The Voice, the black newspaper, it's online. And my dear departed mother, I wrote a letter to her in it. And she said, she always told me this story, how she was attending to the sick in the hospital in London back in the 50s. And the patient said, "Get your black hands off me." Now that is racism right there. So blatant, so overt. And my mother, being who she is, just like Mary Seacole, still, instead of saying, "Well, I'm not going to attend to you," she still professionally dealt with this sick person. And that's where we're talking about how much we've come far in terms of nurses from Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean to build up the national service, and are being airbrushed our history. And I need youngsters to hear this. Current and future generations need to know we helped to form and build up. We were invited here. Yes, I was born here, but my mother and her two aunts were invited here. Come over to Macedonia and help us. The war had just finished, 1939 to 1945. Britain needed to build itself up, and it relied on the Commonwealth to do that. And there were so many who came part of the Windrush generation to do that. And they were those. And I'm proud. And that's why I'm continuing in their footsteps by, for the last 8 years, doing this diabetes awareness, diabetes education out there in all communities. But I do have a great emphasis on my own community, because people say to me, "Tony, we're understanding you." One person said to me, "I've had my doctor for 30, 35 years, speaking with like a hot potato in their mouth. And I had you for just an hour and a half. And when you done tell me about and going into the Jamaican language and so on, I understand clearly what I need to do. We wish we could clone you and have more of you out there getting this message across to communities." I go into Asian communities as well. And some of them, they bring interpreters. And they say, "Mr. Kelly, you're so animated and you explain everything. Even the interpreters sit down and allow me to just go with the flow." Speaking to 100 people, me the one, as we would say in Jamaica, one dege African Caribbean man, surrounded by 100 Asian people, because they too have a major issue with their diabetes and keeping it under control. Now we move on to the current situation. We've spoken a lot about COVID-19. I must give my take on George Floyd and the demonstrations. Some of my friends started watching it, but they knew what the outcome of the 8 to 9 minute video was. Some of my friends have decided it was too painful and they stopped watching. I watched it, and I'm telling you, it was painful. Even now, just talking about it, I'm feeling that pain. Somebody has their hands behind their back in handcuffs on the ground, and is saying to the officer, he's not struggling, not doing anything, he's as calm as ever, and saying, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe," repeatedly, crying out for his mother. This is a big man, a grown man, crying out for his mother more than once. And yet still, the officer had his knee on his neck, and we watched in front of us this man's life ebb away. Now, if that isn't murder, I don't know what is. Then to charge him with 3rd-degree murder to start with, they've now upped it to 2nd degree, and it needs to be up to 1st-degree murder. And by Christ, Jehovah, Jah, or whoever you worship, I am so glad the demonstrations are taking place, the protests, because I've heard it said it's deja vu. He's one who was, "My camera never lies." That was there right in the presence of everybody. There have been so many of these unnecessary deaths. Absolutely many of them. And we have to say enough is enough. Some people don't like the slogan Black Lives Matter. I like it. Some people would say all lives matter. But I'm afraid it's not the white people who are being killed. It's the black people who are losing their lives unnecessarily. And it pains me. It hurts me. It could be my son or my daughter. It could be me. It could be anybody else. It has got to stop. And there's going to be a sea of change. I'm so proud people, both Every ethnic group you can think of is out there being part of the demonstration. I see young people out there with their placards and shouting and so on. Some people say, well, what do I have to say about the burnings and the destruction and so on? There's always a little mindful set who will want to go down that road. But most of the demonstrations have been peaceful. Most have. And people even say some of them are deliberately others coming into areas, including some white people, and infiltrating and causing all this mayhem and making it look as if it's the black people who are doing it. I'm not saying that there's some black people out there who are not doing this, but can you think of the anger and the frustration? There's a saying, who feels it knows it. And black people for over 400 years have felt the suffering and the humiliation and the oppression and the systemic racism that has happened. And therefore, they're saying, we can't take this anymore. It's time for action. How one goes about doing that action is another matter. But the authorities now, they're going to have to stand up and listen and take note and think, well, hang on here. Something's not right. Because if white people are beginning to join in, because on the whole, white people used to remain silent. But I've seen a sea change in white people, which is very admirable. They're coming out and saying, no, this can't continue like this. This is truly painful. And I won't even bother to talk about the current person in the White House, because I will just get angry. So I leave that till November, when the people will have the choice to decide, do they want that person still in there, or do they want somebody else? Because that's another issue in itself. But we're going through this sea of change, and it had to happen. And sadly, it took COVID-19 and the death of George Floyd, I should say, to bring it about. And he's going to stay in the conscience of people for a long time. Because I remember years ago, some of you viewers might not remember, Rodney King was battered in Los Angeles, California, by a lot of police officers who even put batons up his backside. And they beat him. And eventually it went to court. And the upshot, look up Rodney King, the upshot of that was the jury found the police officers not guilty. When I was going to bed, it flashed up on the news when we were going to bed, because Los Angeles is way behind us in terms of time. I said to my wife when we were going to bed, this is many years ago, I bet you when we wake up, Los Angeles is going to be on fire, because the people there have rightfully had enough of this. All the evidence pointed to the brutality and what they did to this man, and I was in hospital for so long, and so said, so done. Lives were lost. 50 odd people died on that night alone from the disturbances, protests and riots that took place in Los Angeles. If you don't believe me, go and look it up. Some of you might be too young to know about that. So here we are, 2020, and have we made progress? I'm afraid we haven't. So yes, people, you demonstrate peacefully. You go out there and you ask for change, and you write to your MPs. And this is something I've been doing because I've been in equity, equality and diversity all along. I see programs on television, and I go to events, and I see a sea of white people, and they say, excuse me, we're talking about diversity here. Think diversity, promote diversity, manage diversity, value diversity. Where are the other people? Be kaleidoscopic, be cosmopolitan. Show that not just lip service, or you promote the one and have the token black and say, oh, we have a black person in the organization. We don't just want one black person in the organization. We want many. And I've sat in on panels as an interviewer. I won't name the organization. We have had to fight the corner of black people who have come for interview, excelled and done well. And when we score them 1 out of 5, keep on writing what they've said. I've seen my white colleagues giving them 1s and 2s. And I have to then say, excuse me, how did you justify giving that person who's just left the room a 1 or 2 out of 5 when they said this, and deserved a 4 or the maximum 5. It got to this stage where some of them, because I'm not afraid to talk out, some will just turn a blind eye or so on. I'm not that sort of a black person. They sometimes subtly arranged interviews so that it was done when I was at a meeting or I would be elsewhere or I had other engagements. But I soon got the gist of that and put that right. But those are the subtle forms of racism. It's not like in the days when my mother and her 2 aunts were here in the 50s, where it was no blacks, no dogs, no Irish. The Race Discrimination Act came into being, and that had to go. But there's still subtle, very covert. Covert means under the cover, as opposed to overt and blatant ways of still oppressing and keeping black people down and preventing them from achieving their true potential. And on that note, I wish everybody all the best. To be continued. TBC, to be continued.